Hello and welcome to Note to File, a clinical research podcast.
A collection of interviews, candid commentary, and general nonsense for the clinical research community.
Check us out at notetofilepodcast.com.
And now, without further ado, on to the show.
All right, guys, welcome to another Note to File Live. Today is July 16th, and it is National Hot Dog Day. In case you guys are wondering. So,
Congratulations.
yeah, congratulations to hot dogs everywhere. So my question is this: what's your most controversial hot dog topping?
So I don't really eat hot dogs officially. I do more like the brat. That's like that. That's more the world I would go to.
Counts. Well, first of all, I am outnumbered by having two Wisconsinites on a call. So
Are we known for hot dogs?
Well, like sausages, like hot dogs, brats, beers, brats, and cheese.
I did a hot dog tour through Chicago one year.
There you go.
Tried
they famously
stopped at 10 different hot dog stations, but I would have like a little bit of each one. And yeah, I don't love hot dogs.
You got the baby dog.
Why did you do a hot dog tasting tour then?
Peer pressure? I don't know. I did more fries tasting, so I have a lot of opinions about the best fries in Chicago more than hot dogs, but
perfectly
it's still
fair.
a fun bike tour through Chicago.
Well, they hate ketchup there, right?
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of ketchup.
Oh, here we go. See, right off the bat, Scott, ketchup does not belong on a hot dog. I don't disagree. Not a fan of ketchup on a hot dog. I like cream cheese on a hot dog. That's my most controversial hot dog take.
That's a lot to process.
I mean, try it.
No
try
pun
it and tell
yeah,
right.
Seriously. I don't know. I don't know about that. I mean, sure, I'll try it.
It might lessen the taste of the hot dog, though. So,
is that a good or a bad thing?
Cheese. Might be a good thing for Denali and I.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, and I'm not mad at it. Like, my kids eat them all the time. So, like, they're around. We use them for fishing. The kids like to use them as, like, you cut them into, like, hot dog worms. Because I don't keep worms in my fridge normally, unless I'm, like, planning on it. So, if we, like, ad hoc go fishing, we'll cut up hot dogs. The last time we did it, we learned that snapping turtles love hot dogs. And so we were sitting there and they ended up just, like, feeding hot dogs worms to the snapping turtle and naming it hot dog and telling everyone and their mother who walked by us that we now have a pet snapping turtle named Hot Dog.
And Oliver says that dairy on hot dogs is a wild take. I got one word for you, Oliver: cheese. Right? I mean,
I'm not going to fight that.
That's not a wild take.
They even put cheese in hot dogs.
Yeah, cheese brats, right?
Yeah, or hot dogs. I mean, they have.
It's all in the same family to me. It's hot dog shaped things that go on buns.
Brats are way better.
I mean, I don't disagree, but it's not brat day, okay? It's National Hot Dog Day. Please respect the day, okay?
Chili dog. Let's go chili dogs. I'm not mad at a chili dog. I will eat a hot dog if you cover it with chili and cheese. Again, cheese. Common thread here. Onions.
Fair. Okay. And look, believe me, I could spend this whole hour talking about hot dogs and all those subtle nuances that are involved, but I want to welcome our guest officially. Laura, thanks for coming on today.
Happy National Hot Dog Day. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for honoring it. Yeah, we'll start out like we do with all of our guests. Tell us a little about your background when it comes to clinical research. How'd you give us your clinical research origin story, if you will?
Yeah. I joined clinical research back in 2010 after spending a few years at Epic, the EHR company. So that's what brought me to Madison. And there was a company also in Madison in clinical research, Forte at the time, which was a CTMS for academic centers, cancer centers at the time. So I joined because I couldn't stand Epic anymore. And I also felt like clinical research was interesting as a concept because my undergrad was in molecular biology and I couldn't stand lab work, but I felt like clinical research was kind of like the fast forward button for the things that I used to be interested in the lab. All of a sudden now they're in humans and, things are working. It's not just a concept anyway, so conceptually was interested in it. and then ended up, expanding beyond academic centers and cancer centers and launched a bunch of products, some to sites and site networks. So, for the first 10 years, spent all the time with varying degrees of different types of sites. And then I basically helped the company exit. So we sold to Advara, and then I gave up the product management side, which is what I had been doing, and then did corporate strategy, helped put the companies together. A pharma-facing ethics review company is very different than a site-facing company. So it was interesting, and we were actually almost the same number of people at the time, which was an interesting, task to basically help two very different companies integrate. And then we started acquiring companies. So we acquired 6 companies in 18 months to execute on the strategy, and then exited to the largest private equity. And then I missed the early stage. So that was 13 years in clinical research, and from the site perspective, and then with the Advara side, the pharma and CRO perspective as well. And then been in venture capital and have stayed connected in with the clinical research world here as well.
What drew you to VC from, what was that? What was the pull there?
I liked the investing side. So when we did strategic M&A with Advara, I really liked it. I think a big part of what I enjoyed about it was the strategy side, and the larger that we got, the more kind of it became more of a financial conversation as opposed to a strategy conversation. I like the venture capital side because it's early stage, and so you don't have the financial information. Like you can't just rely on the financials to decide if it's a good investment. So it's much more of an art than a science. So kind of felt a bit back to the strategy side, and then just with the kind of 0 to 1 product launches, I feel like that's very similar to startup, and I just like the process of figuring all of that stuff out. So, but I like not being the one to have to figure it all out. So, and side.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I'm curious about sort of the role of VC specifically in the clinical research space. I mean, we see, and I'll be the first to admit, I'm not that well schooled or educated about even the difference between PE versus VC and what that means for, well, anything, frankly. And how those differ from one another. And then, what we're seeing in the space right now, which is not always clear to me, who's investing in what, and again, what does that actually mean? So, I mean, can you at least explain it like I'm a dummy, which I'm definitely not a dummy, but pretend like I'm a dummy just for everyone's sake. Pretend like I'm an idiot.
Get your crayons out, Laura.
Yeah, right. I'll actually color on the wall behind me too. So venture capital is usually the earlier stage, and private equity is later stage. So private equity usually, and then there's an intermediate that's growth stage, which all of these terms kind of bleed a little bit into each other, but it's usually those 3 terms. So private equity usually means that you're looking for cash flow positive companies who are, more predictable, lower risk growth, but you're looking to get 3 to 5x return in 3 to 5 years, and it's more predictable and lower risk.
Right.
So larger, more established companies or services companies. So usually for those looking at site networks, which is big in this space right now, usually it's private equity firms who are looking at those businesses. On the other end of the spectrum, venture capital companies are anywhere from pre-revenue. So they'll invest in startups that don't even have revenue. Some of them don't even have a solution yet. Some of them is just an idea on a napkin, but they believe in the founder or the idea, all the way up through usually, some of them are Series F, but normally if you get Series C, and then you can usually go to private growth or private equity. So all of those, pre-seed, seed, Series A, B, C, all of those are different stages of venture capital companies. Normally, it is, riskier than a private equity. And so rather than steady growth, they're looking at hockey stick growth and wanting, to invest in companies. So it's it's typically a little bit more of a go big or go home sort of mentality.
So it's sort of a combination then I'm hearing of like dollars and total investments and the size of the investment, but also like the mentality and the strategy behind it is also like the variation. So that there's probably a weird middle ground where you could be PE, you could be VC, and that then becomes more so the mindset, less the actual like pool, right?
Yeah, fair? And I think that's probably the middle ground is where growth companies, it's become a little bit more common over the last several years to be a little bit in the middle, basically. Like you want it a little bit later, but you're willing to make some bets as long as it's big enough and there's, you know, enough proof points. But usually they'll need, you know, a few $1 million in revenue if they're going to be putting, you know, a lot of money towards it. Whereas VC, it's like smaller check sizes, at least to start. And then, you know, plenty will give follow-on checks if they see it going well.
So you referenced like PEs in like the site network space. Where are you seeing these kind of hit in the clinical research space specifically?
I was seeing what hit?
Like these, like the PE firms, like where are they investing? Where is VC investing in clinical research? Like, are you seeing trends in the space?
I mean, generally private equity, lots of site networks. I feel like there's been kind of a lot who are chomping at the bit for finding good site networks and kind of consolidating that market. I've seen some in terms of kind of the next wave of CROs in the similar vein of, you know, what's going to be the new type of CRO that disrupts, you know, the existing model of CROs. Otherwise, I feel like it is mainly PE interested in the larger clinical research companies that have figured something out and are, you know, cash flow positive. So just kind of those who figured it out. From the venture capital perspective, I think it's really interesting because there are a ton of companies who are popping up and doing a lot of different things. And so I actually have, so I've been in VC world for 2 years now. And I will say, I think there's a growing interest in this space, even more so than it was a couple of years ago. I think there's still a lot of VCs who are hesitant on investing in this space for a couple of reasons.
Why?
One, there's regulations and a lot of the regulatory limitations that people just don't know. So, you know, if there's a bunch of regulations you don't understand, you don't know how to get around them, you don't know where the problems will lie, then, you know, people shy away from that. The sales cycle is very long for pharma to buy anything. So normally VCs will be investing in pharma facing tech because pharma can spend a lot more money than sites can.
What do you mean?
I'm not sure if you're aware. But on that side, the private equity companies will invest in site tech once it gets to profitability, because then it's a little bit more solid growth. You kind of know what to expect. So that's an interesting kind of nuance there. But pharma, you know, sales cycle is very long and it's also lumpy. So a lot of times, especially for startups, you can't sell enterprise wide. So it's not just straight ARR, you know, subscription, the same amount of revenue every year per customer. It's, you know, you go up on a trial and then, you know, it goes down and then you go up on another trial. And so you kind of have to get comfortable with a different sort of model than just a straight line of revenue that gets, you know, that increases.
Well, you can get the best of both worlds by selling into academic medical centers where it's really long sales cycle, and then there's also not a lot of money.
Perfect. Yeah, it's great. So recommendations for those starting companies.
How often do people chase you down at conferences to pitch you ideas?
A lot. Yeah.
And it sounds like you love it.
So I really like the clinical research pitches because I almost want to have a full understanding of everything that's out there. So it doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to invest in, you know, 99.9% of them, because there's a lot out there. But I like to, even if it's a little bit later stage or earlier stage, I like to understand what innovations are out there, just to, you know, if I'm going to actually invest in something, I want to have a good idea of the landscape, even if it's not a well-known name yet. But yeah, we call it pharma tech is what we've called the clinical trial world stuff because it's really software. But between pharma tech and digital health, so like non-clinical trial stuff, I come across 2,000 deals a year.
So you're
it's a
really
lot.
good at saying no.
I'll say you love to crush dreams.
Oh, actually,
There you go. There you go.
Perfect. Laura the
You're-
Dream Crusher.
Queued you up for that.
That's phenomenal. Okay, so there's something you mentioned that I want to circle back on, and it's more the PE in the site network space because I've been struggling to really understand this, and for a couple of reasons. I think where I want to start is like back at SOS this year, there was a panel about different investment strategies, I think, and there was someone from an investment firm there talking about we want, predictable revenue, we want to show your growth. And like I get how you could put it on paper. You could put it in Excel and say, hey, I'm a site, I have this many trials and this is how many patients we said we were going to enroll. And so you can make this very pretty model of what your projections look like, but I'm struggling to understand how that reflects reality, because what it seems like is that we're doing that, we're putting a lot of money into it, and maybe it's not panning out as we plotted it. So I'm curious as far as like how you're seeing that investment sphere play out with PE in those site network spaces, because I just don't fully get it in like reality. I get how it could be good on paper. I get how you could make the investment, but I don't see how it could play out as it's been projected.
Some of the PE strategy is more, like you said, predictable growth as opposed to hockey stick growth. So I think the expectations are slightly different in that if you're investing, you pay a dollar amount upfront, assuming that you continue to grow. And so basically it, makes up for that over time. And then you exit at a multiple of that. So ultimately, to take it on for the next one. I think some of
is it predictable though? Like it doesn't, like, Brad, could you actually like feasibly, like, I'm going to predict what this is going to be? Because it doesn't seem like it is.
I mean, well, again, I'm not that smart, so it could just be, but no, I mean, from year by year, it's not it's not very reliable because we're at the whim of whatever's happening more broadly across the industry. If I'm great at cardiology trials, and this year, like, look at the vaccine thing, right? A lot of sites blew up over the vaccine trials. Well, there are no more vaccine trials. So, I mean, I know there are sites that are hurting. Yeah, well, we can get into that. There are sites that are now like, they didn't diversify. They hurt, some shutter because, they can't, there's just, it's not a reliable stream. And again, maybe that's easier at bigger size where you can manage, more business lines or whatever you want to call them, more therapeutic areas. But I don't know, for me, I don't see it as particularly predictable, but maybe I could also be doing it wrong.
Yeah, no, I feel like the larger, like to your point, the larger you are, probably the more it evens out. And so the more predictability you can get, which I think is where the site network piece is, they're just doing a lot of consolidation. So maybe it's less predictable, but almost like forcing the predictability with some of that. And then with the economies of scale. So basically, not only can you get more leverage or get more out of, a core group of people to be able to serve potentially more locations, but also your bigger name. So more likely to get more studies because of the larger entity, knowing that that's, more desirable for sponsors.
And I wonder about the economy of scale thing at first. I mean, running a site or site management is essentially a service business, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a software or a tech business. So you're not going to get, like, in my mind, there's only a certain level of like scalability you can reach. It's you can grow, but you need bodies.
Yeah.
And so, yes, like a central team can support so much, but even then, like, if you're running 300 studies, you probably need more regulatory people. So like it's some level of scale, but not nearly what you would see across, other industries or other sectors, I would think. So like, I wonder if that becomes a limiting factor. And you need coordinators, you need bodies on the ground to actually enroll these patients too. So that's always been a little bit, I don't say perplexing, but again, is it somewhat self-limited in the amount of economy of scale you can reach, because you scale is somewhat limited inherently by the nature of the business.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's true for pretty much like any care delivery, right? Like you're seeing a patient, like you can't scale that, right? Like you're seeing people in person, like healthcare in general, research as a facet of that would have a similar model, you'd assume.
Yeah. I think it's probably a little bit more of the study startup like activities. Like the more that you can centralize the budget and the contracting,
right.
and potentially demand an MSA because you're large, then you can shrink that whole process down in a way that individual sites wouldn't be able to. But I'm not a PE investing in site networks, so I don't know.
Sure.
I think from an overall perspective, I think it can be beneficial to have some of the consolidation, as long as we're not getting into a monopoly situation and we're not overlooking some of the new ones. I actually think that some of it could open up possibilities of expanding kind of the tentacles into underserved population areas, and to expand access, because it's a larger name, that it's less of a risk from a sponsor perspective as well.
And I was also thinking from like a quality perspective, like if you're a standalone site and maybe you have people who are doing it, but like, can you truly develop the expertise to a certain level? If you have a larger centralized team, you have people who can like really get in and specialize. So maybe you're not necessarily doing it more cost effectively. Maybe you are, but maybe you're just providing better potentially. I don't know.
Yeah, and to that point, potentially easier to scale from a hiring perspective, because you're not looking for like a unicorn person. You can kind of divide and conquer and hire for specialties.
Yeah, fair point. Fair point. So I had seen, I want to switch gears a little bit if I can, but I think maybe it was the first innovation gathering where you did a talk about what was it about? Integration, essentially, like between all these disparate softwares and processes and stakeholders, like in the clinical research space. That was what, 3 or 4 years ago now, probably.
Yeah, I think 3 years ago. Yeah. Maybe 4.
All of our problems are solved now, right?
Yeah, all of them. Yep.
Is it fixed?
My talk changed the world, and everybody fixed their problems. So yeah, it's
well, no, I mean,
now.
it was a great talk, and like it was like that's what was shared. That was my introduction to like what the whole innovation network gathering anyway. And I think it's as obviously as relevant now as it was a few years ago. Well, I mean, why? I feel like we haven't really gotten much closer.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any like insights since then, or anything like you would like tack on to that talk to be like, oh well, here are some reasons why, or is it getting better and it just doesn't seem that way?
I don't know that I don't know that we've moved the needle much on it, but just as a kind of recap on that is, I think it was unblocking the innovation bottleneck in clinical research, because basically we've got all these silos and tons of duplicate data entry from sites, and that's a problem. And so there's all these different solutions. I think there's been debates on like, well, just one platform should, rule them all and everybody uses the same one, but then it's a monolith and like people won't innovate because they don't need to. But then you get all these startups and then they're, disparate systems. And so like my point was we need to interoperate between the two, because sites need their own tech for good reason, but sponsors need their own tech for good reason. We can't just like flip to only use site tech, because that would add length to studies. And then my second one this past fall was basically the follow-up to that, which I think is more like my call to action, which is on sponsors, because tech companies, having been in product management, tried to prioritize all of the things, tech companies will be able to do what their customers ask them to do and pay them to do. And it is, I feel like, a responsibility on the tech companies to have an understanding and push their customers to do the right thing. So I think it definitely is something that tech companies need to understand, the great divide, basically connecting the two. But just having lived it for so long of prioritizing things, you can't really prioritize things that your customers aren't asking for or paying money for. And so all that to say, it comes down to pharma really having a better understanding of this problem of the burden on sites and kind of the great divide, because as soon as pharma understands, feels the pain, and then can start to look at the, the ROI of doing this, they start asking their vendors will do it. And I feel like it's really comes down to, a paying customer.
I guess that's part of my question. Like, is the ROI not obvious?
I don't think it's obvious to them right now.
Fair. I mean, it feels inherently obvious to me anyway. But like, again, if you have sites who can do work better and more efficiently because systems are being designed with them in mind at the very least, doesn't have to be necessarily, again, we'll never be the customer in that relationship. It's just not, that's okay. I accept that. But if it can at least be made to not make our lives worse, that'd be a great ROI for that sponsor. Because I'm going to do better work. I'm going to be more efficient. I can spend more time finding patients, which at the end of the day,
those studies. Yep.
That's what a site is. That's the value of a site are their patients, or the ability to enroll patients, right? So everything should be as geared towards that goal as possible when it's site facing, right? I mean, it seems, again, should be fairly obvious.
I think that we haven't developed like good metrics to show the ROI though. And I think we get very like short-sighted into like, I want this thing because it gets me this thing at this rate faster and we get this much money. It's a lot harder to show that like black and white, like you get this in return, to be like, hey, we're going to give you all these things. We're going to integrate it. And over time, you're going to become more efficient, more effective. And ergo, then it will be better and you will be faster and you'll save money and all of that. But it's not a direct like 1 + 1 = 2 equation. And so I feel like it's just like, Laura, to your point, it's not inherent because it's not black and white right in front of folks. And I feel like people are too focused on the right now bottom line. Like I've said this probably on this podcast before, but like concept of like, you have a kid and you say you can have 1 marshmallow now, or you can wait 5 minutes and you can have 5 marshmallows. And at a certain developmental state, the children understand that that's worth it. And I feel like we're still at the 1 marshmallow right now phase in all of this. And I don't know the best way to get to that 5 marshmallow phase.
I mean, I think a couple things contribute to that. One, because pharma is so huge, they're almost forced to operate in silos, which is like the study budget. And so that makes it hard to fit within a particular budget. So you need, some of that longer term oversight, and pharma doesn't just have extra money laying. It seems like they would, but like there's shareholders, there's stock. I mean, it's just like it's a whole equation that it's a big impact if you start investing way more than, what they are today. And so I think there's needs to be more creative thinking around that though, because I feel like there's not simple ways to do it, but ways that are kind of taking that longer term path to be able to, potentially split it into study budgets, but also, investing kind of at an overall level. In that talk that you mentioned, Brad, I think I had cited a survey that was about sites and how much time they're taking to duplicate data enter. And I think it was something like 8 to 10 hours a week per person, like per staff member. So if you think about like 20% of your time is, wasted basically. And if you could spend all of that time recruiting more patients, that would likely make the study go at least 20% faster, which is, maybe it's not a 20% budget cut. If it's 20% faster, they say like every day a drug is delayed, it costs $1 to $8 million in opportunity costs. So it's like, 20% faster could equal a lot of money. And I don't know if that's a direct correlation, but I feel like some of those things are, useful to at least start to think about. And then also with sites being the face of clinical trials to patients, I feel like there's got to be some, some sort of ROI with that I feel like somebody should study.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a way to. We need a double blind placebo controlled tests here, right? Like I feel like you could do something not dissimilar to that, where again it seems obvious, but we love data. It's a data driven industry, so I'd be curious to see that. And I'm always curious too, like what, I mean, in your mind, what can sites do? I mean, look, we're doing this because we want to do a good job. I feel like it's, again, we
Mhm.
feel like it can feel like a very, I don't know, frenemy situation between sites and sponsors, but we're all
Mhm.
trying to get the same shit done. And at the site level, you don't feel like you really have much of a voice. Like, is there anything out there you think sites can do to help make that reality? I mean, we complain a lot. We got that part down, but beyond that, like, what can we do?
A good question. I mean, I think the fastest route to help pharma gain understanding is to have them shadow. But I think that's the challenge, is normally it's the CRAs who are on site and they don't have direct input into which technology gets used for the next study. So it's almost, getting the opportunity where there are people who are potentially there to listen, and, like, if you can, like, spend a day at my site and I'll
Yeah.
share with you, I'll actually have you shadow a bunch of people, because I feel like I've shadowed before, and it, like, makes me really want to fix it.
Yeah, I will say there was at least a period there briefly where I saw a lot of tech vendors coming through sites and like shadowing. Now, that doesn't really solve like the bigger problem,
You
because
need
again,
both.
to your point, the vendor can't really give the value prop, I guess, necessarily. I guess it can, but it's going to come on. It's going to hit differently than coming from the sponsor themselves. And I've been lucky because I have been able to make some relationships with people at sponsors that I can go directly to, and I think people do care, like, generally speaking. But yeah, I would love to see more sponsors on site for a day or two to like see how this stuff goes. I feel like there's still a little bit of a, it's a little bit of a like, oh well, they can't. We got to keep them away from each other for some reason. There's like a real hesitancy for sponsors to interact directly. And to your point too, CRAs. I love CRAs. There's a bunch of amazing CRAs out there, but they got metrics to hit, man. They got to be on days on site so many times per month. They got to fill out their reports.
Well, to the same level, they're doing they're experiencing the same thing. They're at the mercy of whatever is being pushed down to them. They're not the ones saying, let's fix this. They're in a very similar situation, I would imagine.
I think sponsors as well, sometimes it is like behemoth organizations. So even if one person sees something, it might take a while to fix it, or, not fully understand how to fix it. And I feel like some sponsors, I feel like, are uncomfortable with the hard truth, with hearing a hard truth, and, being able to handle that without fixing it immediately, and not being able to, say, hey, Brad, like, we're going to fix this immediately on the study, because a lot of times that's not going to be their reality. But I think the more they understand, then the more hopefully they reach out for some of the solutioning as well, because I think that's where, obviously understanding the problem and all of the nuances is where it has to start. Otherwise, you're just throwing solutions at it, not truly solving it. But there's a lot of nuances in, getting a solution that works as well. So, things that may not have come up in shadowing, that, this would, potentially produce a new problem that we didn't think about. So, I think some of that, like, if there is the opportunity to invite sponsors on site, just, being transparent, and also enough to help them understand that, like, you don't expect them to fix it right away. And also you would love to be part of the, solutioning conversation, or in the next study, if you're picking trials before, before it's already been set, like, the earlier the conversations, the better.
I think some of it, even, I had a recent conversation with somebody at a sponsor level, something, of course, I was like annoyed about, had a conversation. They couldn't really fix it, but at least I got the context of like why that thing is the way it is. And immediately I can sort of move past it. and also like work within the bounds of what that means. But
Yeah.
most of the time sites don't get that, luxury of like knowing like, oh, this seems like a really dumb thing. Well, without the context, yeah, it does. And then once you receive some context, just simple communication,
Yeah.
a 2-minute explanation of like, hey, this is why it's this way. And like, you didn't know this. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Now I feel, again, problem's not solved, but it goes a long way towards,
Why
getting
do we
everybody down the
struggle
road.
so much though with that communication between sites and sponsors in this industry? I mean, I just like, yes, we're siloed. Why is it this like frenemy thing where it's like we're gonna stay apart, we're gonna be at odds? It it seems,
I don't know, man.
I don't know other industries do that. I don't think they do. It seems pretty unique and twisted.
I don't know if there's like a self-preservation from CROs to keep the two parties apart from each other, or I mean, whether it's intentional or not. I mean, I know I spoke at a conference a few years ago about budgets and contracts, which I'm not like necessarily an expert on, but like seen enough of them. And there were a bunch of sponsors in the room, and they came up to me after and were like, hey, we didn't even know like some of this stuff happens because it's all happening from at the CRO level. And so I'm like, okay, in my mind, like you guys are like on a team over here collaborating very closely, and it's like against us, not against us, but like it's you two working together very closely to sort of, come to an agreement. Sounds like they have no freaking idea what the CRO might be doing on their behalf sometimes, which was a shock to me. And the sponsors were like, no, we want this stuff to like work out. We want you to be happy. So, that's obviously put it like a somewhat of a bad taste in my mouth when it comes to CROs. And again, I know it's not their fault entirely either. But again, yeah, I don't know. I just think it's sad and unfortunate. Now I get maybe like your project manager or whatever can't go talk to 200 sites to tell them address each of their problems. But I feel like there's got to be a better platform or way for those things to get communicated. And I think, again, that would do away with a big chunk of the hangups, I think.
So the solution is to pick up your phone and call your sponsor friends, and then sponsors pick up the phone and call your site friends and just have a nice little chat.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes a long way. It's not scalable necessarily. And even then, I mean, I feel just like I'm lucky because I get to have these conversations and meet those people. Otherwise, I have no idea who to even talk to. I have no idea. My coordinator doesn't know who to talk to. They got their CRA. If you tell your CRA and they're like, hey, cool, I'm on site in Columbus, Ohio right now. I'll check it out later. See ya. But that's pretty much where it ends.
Yeah. And that's not giving the visibility. I mean, the whole CRO level, hence why some investment is going towards companies that are wanting to disrupt that. I feel like it's, I think CROs need to change. I feel like some of them are being forced to change given some of the, economic factors. But I feel like there's just a whole level of politics, to your point. Like they have to stay in existence. A lot of them are public companies too that like, but I do think there's some of that, like maintaining the status quo, because that's the predictability of revenue that either, public markets or private equity firms are expecting. And so to like put all of that in an entirely new model where they don't know how sponsors are going to buy, that's putting a company at risk, that's putting share. It's just, I think, complex, which also then means it might be new types of models that disrupt the old CRO models because, by nature, it's hard for somebody to, disrupt themselves in an entirely new model. So interesting times.
That's fair. Again, I like to think it's getting a little bit better, but it's a slow.
There's actually already a solution out there.
Yeah, thank you. That's Bo Laura at Amazon. So thanks a lot, Bo. I think we should have like a buzzer that anytime anyone mentions SIP, we like hit the buzzer. Something happens on the screen.
One of those buzzers.
Well, I mean, it sucks because like the concept of SIP is actually great, and that's something I would welcome. But the execution of SIP leaves a little to be desired. Let's just say that. So I hate it because I hate for that poor execution to like shut down the idea. Like, well, that didn't work, so that must not be. We're on the wrong track. Because I don't think they're on the wrong track. I think they just somehow made it one of the most torturous experiences for sites to have to deal with, even though the idea is solid.
And it's only open to a certain set of pharma companies as well. So I think if you were to be able to expand that to any pharma company and you had the integration with the site systems, that could be really interesting. But yeah, the like.
Okay, I have an idea I want to pitch you.
I'm sure everybody's excited for.
Laura's gearing up to tell you, go fuck off.
Yeah, I was waiting for my dreams to be crushed.
We don't have
What
to
else?
do that on live LinkedIn.
You're right. Yeah. So I mean, aside from interoperability and lack of communication and silos, like what are the other like big issues in clinical research, like as you see them? I know you've talked about like even just awareness of the existence of clinical trials being problematic, but I guess what would you say still remains to be big problems to be solved?
I mean, I would love for us to figure out a sustainable, scalable way to get to the like 95% of patients who don't have access to clinical trials, which is the 95% of physicians who either don't know about them or don't have access. It's not an easy problem to solve. I think, there's been plenty of companies who have, made a little dent on it. I feel like from a scalable perspective, it's just hard. I think there's a lot of issues with either, training up new physicians and, standing up clinical research as a whole, to like getting them new studies. If you're not a big name, to, then if it's a referral, like people don't want to refer their patients to never be seen again because they have a business to run too. So I don't think it's, I've thought about it, and especially, in investing in this space, have kept an eye open for companies that specifically solve for this. And I think from a services perspective, it's really hard to scale something like that, especially, from a startup perspective. Kind of intrigued by companies like the Hawthorne Effect, or Hawthorne Health, whatever they're called now, that kind of take an Uber model of like getting patients everywhere. So it would be interesting to see how that kind of scales over time. But yeah, I feel like that's a kind of BHAG problem for us to solve in this industry.
Do you think new-ish FDA guidance about inclusion of healthcare providers will like open the door like for more solutions? I mean, in the past, it's been kind of like a gray area, I think. And sometimes, like, as a site, you may not have that much incentive to go talk to 10 physicians in your community, because you can't really do anything with them if they're not a site.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and most frankly, I mean, I think it'll always be a relatively small number of physicians who are, well positioned to be sites. It's not going to be everybody, regardless, because it's a lot of work, and whatever, we can get into that some other time too. But, now we at least have a pathway for like including these practices. I think it's way more complicated than the guidance makes it sound, but I do wonder too if that opens the door for at least people to start, really putting some thought into what those solutions might look like.
Janelle, you had a reaction.
So I mean, where I'm kind of getting at is like, yes, there's all of this guidance out there, but it is change. And I think it has to be driven by pharma because they're the ones making the choices, right, to do this. Like, you can't as a site just decide you're going to start including community physicians. Like, it has to be dictated at the protocol level, correct?
Yeah. So I can't decide on my own that I want to include
right
HCP. It's got to be specifically stated in the protocol.
So oddly, because pharma is basically a giant gamble, you're gambling on therapeutic agents, right? Like, huge risk factor in the fundamental core of what pharma companies are doing. they're fairly risk adverse. Like you don't see a lot of them jumping on like, I'm going to adopt this new technology, this new solution. I'm not going to be the first one, weirdly, again, because inherently their whole business model is betting on, is gambling. But as far as like adopting new things, I don't see that. I don't know. I'm a little too skeptical of it, but I don't see that like people jumping in on it, because I think there are a lot of risk factors that go into specifically that, right? Like you're losing control, you're losing oversight, who's taking on that risk, what are the variations you're opening yourself up for. I think it's a cool concept, but I don't think it's, I don't know, seems a little, I don't see that being well adopted.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it'll be easy, but there was and again, I guess consider the source, but there was at least some level of fervor for this to be included, in FDA guidance. Now, I don't know that didn't seem to come from sites or from sponsors.
So who's it from?
From people who have a vested interest in the solutions around those that would address that right now.
You mean it's financially driven?
Well, yeah, without a doubt. But also, I don't think that's the right way to do it anyway. I don't know. It's just interesting. I think there's something there. I don't think what's there now is it, but I think there's something to it. And I think it could open the door. I think it's promising, but I think the people who had a hand in getting that included have no idea about what it's actually going to take to do it. I think it was misunderstandings.
So this is where I struggle, and Laura, you referenced this as well, where like we have a lot of solutions that are being developed. Like it's a new tech, it's a new AI model. This is going to solve the problem. And like that's maybe half of the solution. There's a huge services component that's you need to have to make any of that effective. Like you can find patients, you can activate physicians, but like you can identify physicians, you can provide things more efficiently, but you still have to like do the thing. Again, it gets back to what we talked about. There's a floor of how you like the economy of scale of what you can do. There's still that services element that you have to do, and it's not sexy, and it probably doesn't have huge innovation growth potential, but like you have to do that to be successful. So we invest a lot in these solutions that are cool and they do really cool things, but that's half of what we do, and we don't invest in the other half of it, so they don't actually make a big impact.
Agreed. It's an interesting point from an investor perspective as well, because we are a technology investor, but a big part of this space, especially to pharma, they're expecting services alongside it. So I feel like that's some of the trade-off is, you want to build a business around technology and, provide services only where it's needed. So it's, you like look at it creatively, but if you don't have the services, then you don't sell anything, which is, not good either. So I think definitely needs some sort of combination.
Very good. Well, we're getting down to the last few minutes. Is anything you're dying to talk about here in the last few minutes? Anything that we missed?
I don't think so. Clearly this is a really interesting time in a lot of different ways.
Too many ways.
Too many different ways. But I feel like one is there's a lot of question marks on how, like, what's going to change in FDA processes. And, I know that in the meantime, there's delays and studies and all sorts of questions. I think it's interesting with how easy it is to spin up new innovations, AI innovations that can potentially displace people and companies, that it's just a lot of different moving pieces. But I feel like it's also kind of a cool opportunity for us to like rethink, because it's, going back to COVID, there was a lot that became more efficient because it was lower risk for pharma to do so. So they actually adopted new technology. And I feel like we might have a mix of things going on right now where it might move towards, it's less risky to take some of these, innovative things or rethink how things are done. I've seen a couple of pharma like really leaning to rethinking their whole how they do things. So, I feel like some promising tidbits of that hopefully we'll continue to see the silver lining on it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to look at it. And, just need an occasional plague to wipe out a swath of humankind, and opens the door for innovation, right? I mean, not hoping for that, but yeah, I mean, I get the sentiment, and again, I'm always a natural skeptic, but I agree. I think this could be a really interesting time where we can stand back, do things a little bit differently, as long as we don't screw it up too bad in the meantime.
Yep, exactly.
Very cool. Well, Laura, thank you so much for coming on, and you'll be at ING this year.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Super excited.
And what do we have on next week?
Yeah, next week we have Jeff Smith and Michelle Jones on, who are sort of the founder co-creators of ING, to come on and chat about what that conference is and all of that. So
fantastic humans.
It's on Tuesday.
Yeah, that'll be Tuesday next week.
And then we have sticky notes on Thursday, I think.
A little change to our programming schedule, but yeah. But yeah, we'll all three be there. So, you should come check it out. If you're interested in coming, then let us know. There's a little form. We can probably help get your ticket covered to a large degree. But yeah, great conference. And Laura, thanks again for coming on. And
thanks for having me.
We'll be back Tuesday. And I'm not going to forget to play the outro this time because I keep forgetting to do it. All right, here we go. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to Note to File. We're committed to continuing to bring you independent and unfiltered coverage of the clinical trial industry.
We want to talk about what you want to hear. So if you have something on your mind, hit us up at notetofilepodcast.com.